and today we are going to be bringing to you guys a public live that is specifically designed to have a look at the importance of developing a healthy and balanced lifestyle. It is a bit different though. Today we are going to be putting particular emphasis on the sleep, food and exercise components, and how it is that by taking charge of these we might be able to better empower ourselves to manage our mental well-being. Why is it that we're doing this though? As an organisation, in view of the current climate, mental health has really started to come into the forefront, and what we have decided to do is to give this kind of opportunity once every couple of weeks for the public to come to us to see if there are any kind of questions around how it is that we can better manage our mental well-being, but also so that we have the opportunity to gain some insights as well into how it is that we can better manage our mental well-being. To that end, what it is that we are going to be doing over the next hour or so is we are going to be having a live Q&A session. And that is to say that we're going to be paying very close attention to the chat, and any kind of questions that anybody has around the topic today, please feel free to ask them. We are here in our experience to give as much insight into the importance of this topic and how it is that we can better start to incorporate these values into our lives so that we can empower ourselves. To that end, my name is Charlie. I have already introduced myself, but I am a wellbeing coach with Seropia, and what that means is that I spend a lot of time on the front lines, quite similar to yourself actually, Jazz, day in, day out, dealing with members, helping members to better understand their mental health needs and how it is they can again help themselves. We are a little bit different though, very different in fact to a lot of other mental health services that you might have out there. When it comes to better understanding your mental health and finding some solutions, some people might think that going to the doctors is a good idea, and absolutely that is a good idea. Some people can look to clinicians or people with other kind of academic backgrounds, but we bring a very different perspective. What we like to bring to these sessions is our own lived experience. We ourselves have had our mental difficulties. We've managed to get ourselves to a place where we consider ourselves well, I would say, and what we really want to do is just give you guys a different perspective and opportunity to again increase your understanding.
And I think it's really important before we start, we always disclaim this when we start our public lives, but this is a public live. So for our members that are currently engaging with us on our private Facebook areas, or our members with us, just to let you know, the comments that you will have are on a public platform and they might end up on the video on this live today. So it is really good to have you all here. Please feel free to comment and ask any questions that you might have. If you don't feel comfortable to, don't worry about that. You could just sit and listen or ask us some questions afterwards and we can always get back to you.
Absolutely. And I can see already we've got a comment that says sleep, it's overrated. And it's funny that you should mention that, because for me, when I first started to untangle my mental health and to better understand myself, I immediately kind of dismissed the importance of sleep, food and exercise in particular. You know, it's one of these things that a lot of us can start to deem so intuitive and so obvious perhaps that we will just readily overlook it, and we won't spend as much time as perhaps we should or could focusing on getting these really fundamental components right.
I used to think that I was very similar to yourself, whoever commented that. Thank you very much for bringing that in, by the way. And it is a very common mindset. I certainly used to have that mindset as well. I thought that because my issues were much deeper than my core needs and much deeper than addressing my sleep, food and exercise, my general core needs that my body needed, that they couldn't be negatively affecting my mental health, because I had much worse or much more profound things that were affecting it. But actually, through doing the work and through kind of progressing in my own well-being, I recognised that they weren't necessarily the cause of my mental health to decline, but they certainly didn't help to improve it.
Exactly.
Because I didn't really have my body primed. I'm going to say primed. And they weren't able to, it wasn't able to properly grow. I wasn't able to properly kind of work on those things because I was malnourished or I wasn't looking after my body properly.
Exactly, or overtired from day to day as well. And I love in particular what you were mentioning about this kind of idea sometimes, and I definitely had this as well. When I was locked into my mental health issues, I had this idea that I was so overcomplicated, so complex, that almost any kind of suggestions that came my way, I would dismiss them just immediately, saying this couldn't possibly work for me, and my problems couldn't in fact come down to something seemingly so simple. I've had the pleasure of being proven wrong, and through my own journey I've created almost like a plan, if you will, a list of 4 things that I need to include regularly in my routine so that I can maintain myself and so that I can keep myself well. And exercise in particular, or swimming for me, proven to be one of those 4 fundamental pillars.
Yeah.
And potentially, I think that this could prove to be the same for you.
We've got another comment that says, Josh, your hair is amazing today. Thank you very much, commenter. Sleep can affect so much of our lives. Unfortunately, I get barely any of it due to pain. And we see that so often when pain can affect our sleep. And the unfortunate thing is we have to start to manage our pain, which is difficult. It's such a difficult job because you're at the mercy of your physical health at this point. So it's about thinking about things that might be able to help with your physical pain, things that might be able to, medication, taking that on time, making sure that you've done any kind of exercises if you're in physio or something like that. And actually, if you're not able to get sleep during the night because of your pain, making some time during the day to try and catch up is sometimes quite useful in the very short term. So if you're really looking for, you need some sleep, don't be afraid to have a power nap or something that's going to help you to kind of reset yourself. Take a lot of breaks, let yourself calm, let yourself just chill out for a little bit. That helps. It doesn't fix a situation, because sometimes we can't fix the situation, but what we can do is we can try and prime our bodies as much as we can to give ourselves as much rest as we can do.
Exactly. So for me, it's always about management and just making sure that we're doing our best on a day-to-day basis, so we can give ourselves the best chance, perhaps, of managing our pain, managing our sleep. But what I love so much about that comment there is there's the mention of the physical pain. And for anybody that's had any kind of chronic physical pain, it doesn't have to be chronic, you will already start to see the way that our physical state is inextricably intertwined with our mental state as well. And this is something that we often forget. As humans, we are biological machines. That is what we are, fundamentally. And the same way that if our car broke down, if it burst a tyre, if it needed an MOT, we'd take it to the garage, so too must we now start to do that for ourselves as well.
Absolutely.
Just make sure that we're doing our best where it is that we can and when we can to start to manage the physical side of things, knowing that it will then start to have potentially a huge impact on our own mental well-being as well.
It's about managing expectations in yourself as well and saying, do you know what, I'm not going to be able to get the full 8 hours of sleep if I'm only used to having 4 because of pain. If I can just get an extra hour or an extra half an hour, I'm going to celebrate that and I'm going to give that motivation to then be able to keep trying to improve the sleep. It's really difficult to start with. It's really difficult to kind of celebrate that and just take that as a positive, as a change. But the more we do that as well, the more we start to think, well, yeah, I can keep fighting to get more sleep, get a more routine into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. With this being a Q&A session, shall we have a look at the first question?
Yeah, let's go for our first question.
That'd be very nice. So, how does sleep, food and exercise directly affect mental well-being? I love that question.
It's a really good one.
I absolutely adore that question. And I think this is something that needed to be answered for me before I started to take it seriously. It kind of goes back to what I was saying about us being biological machines. Something that we really start to readily forget is that our brain is just another human organ. And the same way that we might look after our heart, our lungs, our muscles, we have to start to look after our brain as well. But I want to take this just a smidgen deeper. And for anybody that joined us on the Depression Public Live 3 weeks ago, you may remember me talking about this concept called the biopsychosocial model. And what it talks about is the 3 different components that can start to affect anybody's mental state at any single point in time. And a huge part of what potentially can keep us unwell is that biological side of things. And when we're talking about biology, we're talking about our hormones, we're talking about our brain chemistry, so talking about neurotransmitters, that kind of thing there. And when it comes to managing the biological side, very readily what we can start to do is we can look to a GP, to a doctor, for a passive approach, perhaps, to start to manage that. And then you might find yourself being prescribed different medications. But it doesn't just stop there with the biological side. If we can start to look after our sleep, our food, and our exercise, what we will find is that very naturally we are finding a way of managing those hormones, those brain chemicals, that cortisol, that stress hormone potentially that's going through us as well. And that is just another route through which we can start to manage what's potentially a huge, huge part of the problem. And that's why this is so intricate. No?
Yeah, we know which one. I know what you're on about. And also with sleep, food, and exercise, I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But they are sleep, food, and exercise. Our routines that we have around them are kind of really important routine blocks in our day. So if these are being affected, so our sleep, our food, and our exercise are directly being affected, it will then affect our day-to-day routines. It will affect our work-life balance. It will affect things like that. Because if we're not getting our daily needs in, we're less likely to be, we're either going to be overdoing other things or not being able to do enough of the things that we really want to do in our day-to-day lives.
So I'm sure we can all relate to having some really
Absolutely.
direct kind of experiences off the back of this. If I'm without sleep, I'm moody. I'm really irritable, to be quite frank. It is the easiest thing to set me off and to get me getting a little bit emotional. But it doesn't just stop there as well. Around food, if I haven't eaten, if my blood sugar is low, I'm feeling tired. The connection comes in there again. You might have heard the word hangry. I think that's a very, very real thing.
Yeah,
as well.
definitely. And a commenter said something really, really kind of poignant. It says sometimes the quality of the sleep is more important than how long. And this is that is one point that we really do agree with. We're going to talk a little bit about the quality of our sleep later on in the session. I think we've got a question on that further down the line, but it is a very, very good point. Thank you very much. Sleep, food, and exercise, they are core areas, and they are something that it is important to take priority of, but it's a long game, isn't it? If you're used to doing it a certain way for a very long time, it's about working on how we can gently break that habit.
Exactly. The key word always has to be gently, and everything that we're always going to talk about involves small steps, making little changes until eventually we'll find ourselves integrating the way that we want to manage as our new second way of being.
Absolutely.
That is the aim of Okie dokie. So, should we have a look at the next question?
Okay, next question.
That's what. If you're, in your experience, which area did you struggle with most? That's a personal one, I think.
That is a personal one. I think in my case, in my personal journey, food was probably one of the biggest areas for me. My personal experience, I have an eating disorder, so I'm a binge eater, and I've had this diagnosis for quite a long time. And food was always a comfort for me. Food was always something that was my kind of go-to. It was easily accessible. I didn't have to be a certain age to buy it. There wasn't a risk of me being arrested for having it, to have control over it. It was something that I could get readily and easily. And over the years, comfort eating became more kind of needed. It became a desperation to have that. And I developed my experience. The reason I struggle so much with it is because food is a core thing you need to survive. So it's when your main trigger is something that you have to live, it can be such a difficult thing to work on overcoming. And when we're talking about making adjustments to our diet, we know that when it comes to things like eating disorders, that's going to be a whole different battle. It's going to be a whole different pathway that you want to be going down in order to kind of adapt your lifestyles or adapt around the disorder that you have potentially. But it's important that we start to recognise and try. And there's an element of timing. It took a lot of realisation to me to actually realise that my food was directly affecting both my sleep and my ability to exercise. I wasn't sleeping, or I was sleeping too much because of the way food made me feel. And my my exercise was affected because I didn't really want to do it. I was more comfortable in my comfort zone. And that's where it comes to for me. It was about breaking that out, small, tiny steps out of my comfort zone, trying something else, trying new habits that really helped me move on from what I was struggling with. But yeah, that's the answer to my question. Food is the one for me.
Food was the main one, but you're saying it had an impact on all of the different areas. That's really interesting. And
one knocks the other, it seems, a lot of the time.
There's something that I love in particular there that you're mentioning, and like you say, this could have its own topic, and I think we have done one, funny enough, just a few weeks ago, around eating disorders and relationships with food as well. That is a little bit of a specialist subject, and I will say it's not one that I've had any experience with, so I can't share my experiences on that. But like you say, if you have a tough relationship with something that is a necessity in daily life, then that is absolutely something that needs to be explored a little bit further.
Yeah.
But the consequences are kind of worldwide. For me, I would say that my biggest issue was probably sleep. I think I did struggle with all of them a few years ago, but in particular, sleep proved to be the trickiest thing for me. I was going to sleep at ridiculous times at night, quite often staying up until the sun rose and then on the side it was time to go to bed. The impact of that was that I then wouldn't have any kind of normal routine or social connection in my day-to-day life because I'd be getting up at 3 p.m. and at that point most people were finishing up their days before I'd even started mine. But just on that note of sleep as well, issues in getting to sleep, which meant that I felt I needed to have the need to self-medicate to be able to get to sleep, but more so than that, oversleeping. Very rarely undersleeping. I would struggle to get to sleep, but when I was asleep, I would sleep solidly for what could be near 10 to 12 hours a lot of the time. And the interesting thing off the back of that, you'd think I'd have woken up well rested. No.
No.
No, in a single word, no. Waking up feeling more tired, more fatigued, less prepared for the day ahead. And I think I've seen the comment there, I can still see it, talking about the need for deep sleep. It's because the quality of the sleep that I was getting wasn't good enough. It had huge consequences for me. Not socialising, not doing the things that I love, but also as well not getting that basic need met in the way that I really needed as well. Left me more emotionally vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's what I would say the next day.
Absolutely. Sleep is one of those, when you talk about insomnia or a lack of sleep, we very rarely talk about the opposite, when we have too much sleep. And actually too much sleep can be just as harmful in its thing. You get overtired, as you said. And also, when you're oversleeping, usually there might be an issue with the deepness of that sleep, as you said as well. You know, if we are sleeping overly, it usually suggests that our sleep isn't fulfilling the need.
Exactly.
So we're sleeping for longer, and we're missing day-to-day activities. And I think routine in that as well is really helpful in addressing sleep, food and exercise. But obviously we'll go into that a bit later.
We will do, yeah.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. All right, next question, I think. What can changing my lifestyle do for me? That is a huge question
It's a
with
massive question.
huge implications. So, something that I have come to learn in my last few years is that changes in lifestyle and routine can potentially be more powerful than a lot of conventional antidepressants. Disclaimer, I'm not telling you to stop your meds and I'm not taking away from the validity of medication in some circumstances as well. But it is already proven, there's plenty of research that shows that things like sunlight exposure, funnily enough, food and nutrition, sleep and exercise, omega-3, a nice supplement that all of us might be able to readily buy as well, has huge potential consequences for our mental well-being.
Omega-3 is extremely important. They talk a lot about omega-3 and its ability to help dopamine and serotonin attach to its kind of cell. I'm not scientific in the slightest. My brain just goes 1, 2, 3. But it helps to prime your brain to be able to properly accept the good feeling, like serotonin, dopamine, and the reward chemicals.
To accept and to process it as well.
Yes.
But more so than just the three things we were talking about, you know, we've got sunlight exposure, we've got social connection, which can be a change in lifestyle or a change in routine that we start to work into. You know, having that sense of belonging and community as well can have huge positive consequences as well. And we cannot underestimate the importance of engaged activity, which is to say factoring things into our lifestyle which take our full attention, take our concentration and can act as a little bit of a project that we feel impassioned about working on. Absolutely. And building upon. I'm sure a lot of people will recognise this, and I imagine you will as well, Jazz.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time that we are struggling with our mental well-being, we are in some way locked into our own brain. We might be focusing on the immediacy of a situation, we might be ruminating and worrying about the future, we might be ruminating on the past and lost opportunities as well. And engaged activity being incorporated to a lifestyle is huge, absolutely huge.
We can really work on our lifestyle and changing our lifestyles. It can help us to really build a more profound kind of meaning and purpose to our lives. You know, for me, when I changed my lifestyle, I did it in dribs and drabs, and then things started to make a lot more sense. I was able to put things in where it put my day-to-day activities in order. It made prioritising my day-to-day more, you know, kind of more interesting and the importance was put on priority rather than want. Does that make sense? Like, I used to go for anything that would stimulate me because I felt so understimulated with the fact I wasn't feeding my body properly. So I would go with the things that stimulated me. So that was things like video games, things that gave an instant reward. And by kind of, in one way, retraining my brain into going, actually, day-to-day activities can give me that reward if I'm making sure that I'm fueling my body right. It enabled me to be able to enjoy my day, enjoy my existence. And I mean, that's very profound. Works different for everybody, but in my case, it was that addressing that core needs that primed me to be able to really focus on what I needed to change in my lifestyle.
Things outside of the immediate gratification.
Yeah.
I think, and it's really interesting. I've just seen a comment come through, which I think ties in very nicely to what we're talking about. Why do you think it is that when we self-medicate, we tend to lean towards unhealthy behaviours and not the positives or constructive?
Well, one reason for that is because of the way our brain processes rewards. So I know this from having ADHD, but this is relatable across the brain board, so to speak. Sometimes unhealthy behaviours such as drug use or alcohol, self-harm, these things have, even though I'm going to use the term reward, doesn't mean they're necessarily positive reward, but they have an instant reaction. They have an instant reward. So your body has a reaction to the behaviour that you're exhibiting. So sometimes we go for more negative behaviours, or quote unquote we self-medicate on unhealthy behaviours, because they give an instant reward or an instant reaction to what we have put into our body. So for example, drugs is a common one. I've got an experience with drugs, so have you.
Absolutely.
Some people self-medicate with drugs and alcohol because they give that brain that instant reward that we weren't getting from kind of not addressing our needs.
Yeah, potentially, like you say, from not having those fundamental things right, we're left with a void, and sometimes we can feel so overwhelmed as well that we have a couple of options. We can look to work towards the long-term solution. The long term is far away.
Yes.
Right. That's going to take work. That's going to take effort. And sometimes the easier option is to go for something which rewards you, gives you that pleasure immediately. And this is a statistic that I heard, or a little fact that I heard a couple of years ago. Alcohol is supposed to give you that sense of being drunk or that effect within 90 seconds of consumption. 90 seconds. If you are feeling incredibly emotional and you want some kind of outlet or way to kind of mask that emotion, then perhaps going for something that's so immediate in that sense can prove to be the easier option to take.
And we do an activity in the wellbeing planner. As wellbeing planning is a session that we run here at Isaropia, and it's called the Crossroads to Happiness, and it talks about the long-term and the short-term goals, and how in the short term you can feel relief, you can feel kind of happiness, you can feel content, because that immediate situation, that uncomfortable situation that we've got to do, we don't have to do. But then in the long term we start to get the negative side effects of that. In for example, drug use, you might have covered your emotions in the short term, but then in the long term you've now got to deal with withdrawal, and you've also still got to deal with the emotions that are now heightened.
On top of crippling financial debt as well.
Absolutely, and your other core needs, your other financial needs.
Yeah, I think that ties in really, really nicely for it as well. And there's another comment that I've seen come up saying lack of self-worth and respect. But if we go for these options, that's when we can start to tumble into that destructive cycle, right? Yeah. We do something to get that immediate kind of reward, to get ourselves through the moment. Later on, further from the event, we feel a little bit of shame creep in. We feel guilty, perhaps, of the way things have happened. And then that can start to compound our mental health to the point where eventually we might find ourselves needing some kind of outside support to start to break that cycle. And
we talk about the inner critic, and the inner critic feeds. The inner critic is the person who's speaking badly to us. When we talk about, you're good, bad, the voice in our head that's talking badly to us, it's giving that negative criticism. It's giving us that negative feedback. The us doing something quote unquote negative to ourselves, an unhelpful behaviour, is going to feed that inner critic, which is then going to directly affect our self-worth and our self-esteem. There was another comment about learned helplessness.
Ooh.
That could also be a part of it, and that's very true. Learned helplessness can have an effect in that area.
Yeah. So just to describe what learned helplessness is, it describes this concept that perhaps we've been trying to do something away for so long, and if we keep having results which don't work, which fail, we can learn that we can't help ourselves in that regard. And to that end, perhaps learned helplessness, or having tried to manage ourselves in a different way, could lead us down the path where we feel that we need to go for these other things, because that's the only thing that works for us. So that's a good question. But the next comment.
That's a really interesting one. On the back of that question, can you think of any positive forms of instant gratification? There are some, and it's all about, when we talk about unhealthy coping mechanisms, some coping mechanisms that class as unhealthy, like alcohol being one of them, doesn't necessarily mean we can't do that in moderation. There's things like caffeine as well that are, we have a question about that later. Our commenter, deep breathing is one of them. Intense exercise, that's another one that gives that instant gratification. Things like gaming, that used to be one that was really, games are there for that instant gratification. That's their whole selling point. You press a button, it reacts. That gives you that instant reward. So that could be one. Obviously with gaming, there is a level of moderation to that as well. Meaning and purpose is one. The way I found instant gratification in my life was by reframing why I needed to be instantly gratified by everything. And actually, I aim to make sure that I'm taking regular breaks in my day-to-day now to give me some motivation, give me some instant gratification. I will, take some time to do something I enjoy, something that fulfills me, something that I find fun. I will take some time to talk to people and be around people who bring me joy. And these are little things in my life that help me to get that instant gratification, which helps me to then motivate myself to then get the long-term gratification as well.
So I think it's about swapping out the unhealthy for the healthy. But
yeah.
You know what I love? You used the word moderation. I think this is absolutely something that we have to hold true. In fact, a lot of the unhealthy coping strategies that we have, in general, they're okay if we do them from time to time. It's just when they become a regular part of our repertoire that then they really start to become the crux of the issue.
Absolutely.
And just around, if I think of some things that I do which I would consider instant gratification, gaming, very much like you were saying, is something that I enjoy. It is a reward, it's a treat. It isn't my primary objective, it isn't what I built my whole day around. But if I've had a long day at work, if I'm feeling tired, if I've cooked dinner, everything is in order for the next day, I will treat myself to an hour's worth of gaming. Yeah. There or thereabouts. It's not an exact science, but it is something that I can look forward to, and it helps to get me through that as well.
When I was in drug therapy, one of the things that stuck to me the most, I was talking to my key worker, and he said, don't eat chocolate while you're going through your 28 days of kind of withdrawals and coming off of the drugs. Don't eat chocolate from now on. And I kind of looked at him and I went, it's a bit odd. I don't know why. Is there some kind of reaction? He said, have some chocolate today and then don't eat it for 28 days. And when you have it again at 28 days, because your dopamine receptors have gone back to quote unquote normal, because your body is now used to things, you will find it so much more rewarding. Because if you flood yourself with dopamine, why did I put dopamine in air quotes? It exists. When you flood yourself with dopamine through instant gratification, whether that be drugs, whether that be specific foods, whether that be an excessive amount of gaming or gambling, anything that's too excessive exercise is one of them as well. What you do is you lessen the reward because your body is used to getting that reward constantly. So going back to it after you've got to moderated it, got it to a more moderate self, is really helpful. It really helps to improve. You look at it and go, oh, actually, I really enjoy this, and it's something that I can, enjoy. I go back to gaming now and go, oh, I enjoy this a lot more than when I used to play it for 10 hours a day.
That's it. It's about restricting ourselves to the things that we really do enjoy, to the point where we can actually properly enjoy them in the moment when they're there. I know if it's something that's a part of your regular life all day, every day, it's going to lessen that impact, fundamentally.
Absolutely.
I'm realising we've tangented somewhat hard, which is our expertise.
Let's go on to the next question.
You can have a look at the next question, that'd be lovely.
Oh, this is a good one.
Good. So I've got fibromyalgia and exercise is hard for me. Any suggestions? This is a particularly interesting question as well, because a lot of us might be suffering from some kind of physical need or otherwise that might be limiting our ability to do exercise. I'd like to kick off this question just with the definition of exercise, because I think a lot of the time we can start to build up this really grandiose idea of what exercise might actually constitute. When I was unwell, I used to think that if I were to exercise, it would mean that I need to go running for half an hour a day, that I would need to do 2 miles swimming, that eventually I might need to set myself up for running a marathon or swimming the channel. But it couldn't be further from the truth. Exercise is simply defined as any kind of physical activity that requires exertion. But what that really means is that anything that gets you sweating a little bit or gets your heart rate up or a little bit out of breath, it's a tick.
Yeah, and exertion is going to be personal to everybody, depending on your kind of needs, depending on your physical fitness, your pain, whatever that is. Exertion is going to have a different level for everybody. And sometimes when we think about having to exercise, we think of going to the gym and spending 2 hours in the gym getting hard.
I just went wide-eyed with fright when you said that.
Yeah, and actually it can be things like chair exercises. Those are common ones that are used with people with chronic pain.
So I think that's something that we also publish on our page as well. So there we've already got a little bit of help potentially for someone that's suffering with fibromyalgia. But I love the uniqueness that we're talking about here of what constitutes exercise. I love my swimming, and for me, if I swam 40 lengths or so, it probably would just about constitute exercise because I have a lot of fitness in that regard. But if I went running for 3 minutes, that made me done.
Absolutely.
I would have exercised very hard at that point because I'm working a whole different set of muscle groups and way of being. But the same is true also for physical limitations. And with fibromyalgia, it's a really, specifically with this one, it's interesting because there is kind of a link a lot of the time between the effects of fibromyalgia and then our mood as well. But if we're feeling ourselves having a particularly bad day with it, then perhaps the quality of that exercise might change. It might just be sitting up and going make a cup of tea.
Yeah.
That could be enough. It could be chair exercises or something that I was speaking to somebody around recently was the idea that when they're feeling able, they'll take themselves for short walks. Nothing that is too far out of reach, something that they can easily return from as well when they're feeling a little bit out of breath. And that has proven to be a good suggestion that's working for them.
And in the comment section, we've got somebody who says, I have to do half an hour's walk twice a week as I have fibromyalgia as well. So it's around kind of your needs and kind of your limitations, and you're still getting out and doing that exercise, which is really, really good. Yoga or Pilates, very gentle, especially Pilates. So that's another suggestion. It's finding something that's going to work for you that you can adapt to what your body's limitation is. So it might be that you can go to the gym, but for example, if that's your thing, going to the gym, but it might be that you find equipment that is a bit more gentle on the areas that are most affected by your fibromyalgia. Or another comment says hydrotherapy is good, and yoga on your bed or chair exercises, brilliant. Swimming has a massive effect because it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but because swimming you're kind of immersed in water, you're not holding your body weight as
supported weight. That's right.
Supported weight. That's what.
So it's a whole body exercise as well. It doesn't just work a particular area. You're working a little bit of everything, never too intensely as well. That's why when swimmers have to train for competitions, they have to do a load more training than other people because it's all relatively low intensity.
Yeah.
But it's a really nice way to start to get into that. I can see another comment. In my head, I am running a marathon. But see, that's the equivalence right there. If you are going for half an hour walks or whatever it may be, then that can be your marathon. That really can be.
We talk about setting good comparisons of yourself, not of others. And if you're walking half a mile, half an hour, you're walking something that is going to help you. You're doing it that's going to help yourself, and you're doing it being careful of your own limitations. And it feels like you're using just as much effort as somebody running a marathon, then you will celebrate that like you've run a marathon.
Good. Because
you are doing it, you're making that effort and you're putting that energy in, which is the most important thing at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Brilliant. I gotta say, I think we're probably going to move on to the next question now, but I just love the community support that I'm seeing here. So many great suggestions.
A lot of suggestions. Go have a look on the Facebook if you're on there at the comments.
It's really good. I don't think I've ever liked exercise. How can I find something that works for me?
There's a simple answer, and that's try stuff. That was my one. That's the simplest answer I have. Finding something that works for you. The way I did it was, firstly, I threw out the idea that exercise, getting fit, had to be the gym, walking or having a run or swimming, because I like things that are slightly different, as in like they're different every time. So I started to engage in things that were a little bit, they were still getting my heart rate up, they were still making my heart pump. So I was doing things like going paintballing. That was the thing that started off.
Brilliant.
Something that was fun, something that gave that instant gratification, that instant reward, that was amusing, and there was a purpose to it, but I was still doing exercise. It was kind of like I was masking it with something, paintballs, pretty much. Football, sports, archery was one of them. Even though you do a lot of standing when you're doing archery, there's still that exercise element to it.
Sorry, I just wanted to interrupt there just for that one as well, because archery, there's the exercise element, you're still working your muscles,
Absolutely.
but also the focus that it takes. It comes back to that engaged activity that we were talking about a little while back as well. So then you've got another component of managing your mental well-being coming into it. So it's a really good suggestion, and I think it's tricky because I will openly say that there are lots of forms of exercise that I don't necessarily enjoy. I quite like basketball, as long as I don't have to do too much running around. That's kind of my stance on it. I absolutely do not like running. I love walking. I love swimming. The only ways that I managed to discover that was by taking small steps and introducing myself to these things with a little bit of community support as well. Because I think if you have somebody to exercise with you, which of course is a difficulty right now, but hopefully that will be easing in the coming months, then that's something that can make it that much more rewarding.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. Having a partner in it, a partner in crime, or a partner in exercise, whatever that will be for you, it helps make it more rewarding.
It does.
Helps it be less of a chore and more of a kind of social event. What a comment, gardening. That's a massive one. There's so much energy and exertion that can come from things like gardening. Day-to-day activities. I was speaking to one of our old wellbeing nurses, Adam, about how I would used to exercise by kind of furiously pushing the Hoover around, just because it got my blood pumping. I was cleaning for a start. I was cleaning the house, but at the same time, I was exercising. I was tricking my brain into it. Picking the pace up a little bit when you go into the shops, going the long way to go to the shops. Finding ways to trick your brain into exercising, makes your brain go, oh, I like exercise. It's finding something that's going to work for you. And it's good to see people are finding use in things like hydro and swimming, because that is such a good and kind of universal way of exercising if you can swim. And even if you're in the shallow end, having that, it's a good universal one because you can adapt it to your own body and your own needs.
The second your feet are off the floor, whatever you're doing is going to constitute exercise and movement, and that's really the bottom line. That's what we're talking about. It's really, really good.
Should we go on to the next question?
I think we should go on to the next question.
Yeah.
So we have.
Is caffeine okay? Sponsored by Caffeine.
Absolutely.
So caffeine is okay in moderation. I think that's quite fair to say. If you are drinking it in moderation, if you aren't dependent on it, caffeine can be okay in small quantities. Not after 3 o'clock. We tend to say not after 3 o'clock. It can affect your sleep. So caffeine is a stimulant, and stimulants after 3 or 4, because they take a while to get out of your system, can directly affect your sleep, and they can also affect your ability to keep up to date with what's going on. If you're depriving yourself of caffeine, if you're becoming dependent on caffeine, for example. So noticing that caffeine is a stimulant and moderating it. Decaf is always an option. Cutting out high caffeine things like energy drinks, frequent coffee. So caffeine.
All of it can prove to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
I think this is the thing that is so nice about actually living in this day and age as well. There are so many caffeine-free substitutes for the things that we already enjoy. So caffeine, if we're relating it to sleep, just to be clear, Try not to have it after 3 p.m. Switch to an alternative if it is that you can. If I remember rightly, caffeine has a half-life of around 6 hours, and without getting too technical, that means that it stays in your system a lot longer than you might think. And that's why it's important that if we really want to start to master the sleep side of things, we perhaps consider cutting it out earlier in the day.
And it's quite important to say that moderation and having it at times is going to be different for everybody. Tolerance to caffeine is going to be very different to everybody. Some people have a high tolerance to caffeine, or they've drank so much caffeine that the morning coffee just doesn't hit the same way it used to. And some people have a sip of coffee or a sip of tea, and the caffeine is far too much for their body to maintain, so they're not getting any sleep. I think a comment just said something on the similar. It keeps me awake, waking me up all night, so no caffeine at all. It also, the comment underneath says something I was about to say. It does make you need the toilet. So if you're having it late at night, you're more likely to wake up in the middle of the night needing to get rid of it.
That's it.
So caffeine is dependent on your body's and your body's needs, dependent on the type of caffeine you're drinking. So a cup of tea isn't going to have, it has caffeine in it, but it isn't going to have as much caffeine as a can of Monster.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good example of that. So, I mean, of course, it's going to impact kind of the sleep side of things, which is huge. And, you know, if we're just talking about sleep briefly here, the aims of a good night's sleep, it should be uninterrupted and it should be a deep sleep. And like you say, it might interrupt it. But there are interesting links as well when caffeine can be beneficial for mental well-being. Ooh, apologies, little hiccup, but also can be a problem potentially for our mental well-being as well. The thing is, if we drink caffeine, I think a lot of us will recognise this, it can start to mimic the physical symptoms that we might get for feeling anxious or a little bit scared. We get a faster heart rate, we might suddenly feel more alert as well, a little bit shaky. That can happen from time to time. And if that is happening and you're recognising that it's contributing to your anxiety, then it might be something you just want to put on hold.
Yeah.
But on the other side, it can also help you stay more focused, which can be a good thing. As well, if you feel that, you know, a symptom that's often coupled with depression, if you struggle to maintain focus, if you struggle to concentrate, then perhaps it can be beneficial. So it's really individual.
Absolutely, it is an individual thing, and it is a stimulant, so it does then directly affect things like anxiety. Excitement is another one, the direct opposite. It can, it has that effect. So down to your own body's needs, I think, is the is if caffeine is okay. It might be. Might not be, depends on your body. I think that's the answer to that question.
You will know best.
Yes,
but it's
definitely.
always worth perhaps cutting down a little bit or trying a little bit more, perhaps depending on where you feel that you're at in that spectrum.
And if you feel you have a dependency, you can discuss it with your doctor. Your GP will have a lot of advice in how to cut down caffeine intake. Shall we go to the next question?
I think so. So we have, what is a good diet? Big question. How many different diets have you heard of? Sorry, that's a very random question. To throw at you very suddenly. I'll answer that question myself if you'd like.
Well, diets, there's so many different types of what I would describe as fad diets.
Yeah, that's what came to mind.
So branding diets. Everybody swears by a lot of people swear by various diets. I'm not there to judge, whatever works for you. My diet really consists around one key word, and it's balance. Having a balanced diet is so important.
So, you know, like you were saying, because there's so many different diets out there and so many people swear by different diets, I wouldn't be the one to prescribe or to or to suggest rather, a specific diet. But we will always recommend here at Isarobia a balanced diet. That has to come at the forefront of it for me. You know, we've heard of the Atkinson's diet, we've heard of keto diets, and even if you look at different cultures, they will naturally lean towards different diets. Mediterranean diet, really quite high in oils, for instance. Then you can look to Japanese kind of cuisine as well, which might have a higher fish content. And it isn't an exact science, but a balanced diet, which suggests that you're having a variety of different foods. You're not being restrictive too much, only eating a single food group. You're not overeating, but also you're not under-eating.
You're eating to your body type, and you're eating regularly or on a routine. And I think it's really important when we talk about diet, we talk about the importance of balancing when you're eating. Sometimes there are certain diets that promote kind of not eating certain meals in the day, but when we're talking about having a balanced diet, we're talking about making sure that we're getting those 3 core areas of our days energized. So that's your morning, your breakfast, your lunch and your dinner. Breakfast, now that was one that always used to, never used to eat breakfast. So when I actually realised I was quite important, I did eat breakfast. My body kind of rejected it. It started to. I was like, why are you eating it? You don't eat it this time. And it's there's little things like just trying to incorporate something in the morning, just to give you that energy. But I think it's very similar to the caffeine question in that your diet's going to be very built around your own personal needs. Each body is different. Each body has a different need, intolerances, tolerances, and actually researching what is going to be sustainable for you as well. One thing I would say to avoid is, kind of any kind of detox diets, so quick fad diets. Those can be quite damaging, and they don't really offer a long-term solution.
It can be a little bit of an extreme change, perhaps, in what is the eating, which your body might not be ready for.
And we're in no way dietitians. If you feel that you need to discuss with somebody, your GP can refer you to an approved dietitian that's based up at the hospital or your local NHS trust. And they can give you some achievable and reasonable goals that are built around your needs and your limitations.
Exactly, that's a really good idea. We do, however, although we're not dietitians, we do have kind of a recommendation that we'd go for, and a really nice simplistic way perhaps to start to think of food and nutrition in particular is to categorize foods into different macronutrients. And I'm not going to go too big down this, but generally speaking, we can think of there as being 3 main different food types.
And
Carbohydrates. We do have a graphic.
We have a graphic for this.
Potentially.
There it is.
Oh, it's huge. Here is an image that shows our macronutrients. So we have carbohydrates is what we do. We also have proteins and we have fats. And generally speaking, if we're looking to have a balanced diet, we would be aiming for roughly 40% carbs, 30% proteins, and then 30% fats into your diet as well. I do not want anybody obsessing over this. That will prove to be more destructive in the long run. But as long as you're trying to get a variety of different foods into your diet, what you might find is that a lot of the time you're kind of naturally hitting those percentages anyway. So, for instance, if you were to have a peanut butter sandwich on wholemeal brown bread, you've pretty much covered your categories there already. Around 40% carbs, you've got a good amount of fats in there and a good amount of those proteins in there as well.
Yeah.
And it's really not something to obsess over. But
it's
variety
something that
is the key.
Helps to guide, but isn't necessarily going to be something you can work on straight away.
Yeah.
It's something we build up to. We've got a really good question in the comments saying, how do you go about challenging the fear of eating in public? Over the years, I've been very self-conscious eating in front of others, born of eating disorders. My experience with it is that I started to practice it in an environment where I felt comfortable. So in my personal journey, I used Iseropia because I was under Iseropia, and I would surround myself with people that I had trusted, people I learnt to trust. I would also start to challenge it with my family and practice eating in public, not at eating establishments. I would start by maybe sitting on a bench with something that I knew that I could eat fairly quickly and wouldn't be messy, because that was one of my issues. And I would just practice it with people that I trusted, or I did it in an environment. I started eating in public in somewhere where there wasn't people around. That was another one that it's about not pushing yourself too fast or too hard to quote unquote be like everybody else. You can do it at your own pace. If you're quite new to your journey, your recovery, so to speak, take it step by step and reward yourself for doing the progressing, or even reward yourself for maintaining, because when we're going through an eating disorder, even the little things that we do, the tiny things to either keep ourselves on the same track or to make tiny progressions up or massive leaps up, or even recognising when we're going down, because that can be a massive thing with eating disorders. You don't recognise when we're going down. These are really important things to celebrate and say, I'm doing a really good job here. And if you're not able to do it, break it down into something smaller. So if you go, oh, I can't eat this, don't feel comfortable, what can you do that's smaller, that's going to achieve towards that goal? It's going to give you that feeling, it's giving that feeling of success, but it isn't going to take so much emotional toll on you.
Exactly.
I would say that.
Gentle acclimatization.
Absolutely.
It's just the way that I would kind of summarize that. You know, we always preach and talk about small steps, baby steps, gently pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone so that we can change our relationship with food and so we can start to work on that. But I love what you're talking about. You can do it off your own back, choosing public spaces where people aren't there necessarily, but also starting with people that you feel comfortable around. And then you can start to work in potentially.
Really what works for you and what your needs are with your eating. I think that's quite important. Should we go to the next question? Thank you for bringing that in, by the way.
Brilliant.
What can I do to work on my sleep?
Ooh, it's a good one. Okay. So sleep, one of the more complicated topics, and the reason that I would argue this is one of the more complicated topics is because, to a degree, this is the one that we perhaps have less control over. When we are sleeping, I think we're not consciously processing anything. Other things might potentially wake us up, and then also there's the other kind of side of things where our body might feel too energized perhaps to be able to fall asleep as well. The way that I like to think about it is there are 3 things that we can start to look to take charge of in a bid to increase the likelihood of us being able to fall asleep. And some of us might have heard of this word before, but here we like to talk about sleep hygiene. And sleep hygiene describes the set of behaviours or rituals, the things that we will do during the day, so that we can increase the likelihood of us getting that good night's sleep. We can look to change our environment. And ideally, our environment, that is where it is that we're going to sleep, should be dark. You know, if you're getting blue light or any kind of technology, or if your screen is facing up and you get a message in the night, any kind of light potentially can send a signal to your body that it's time to be awake. Counterproductive. We want it to be cool. Interesting phenomenon, when the body is cooling, for some reason or other, it makes us sleepy, is what it does. And that's probably why, you know, we might all remember these hot and sticky nights where we've been tossing and turning, the window's been open, it's been too hot, and that really affects our ability to sleep as well. Quiet is a good idea as well. Not for everybody. I know plenty of people that like to have the TV on in the background, that like to fall asleep to the sound of waves, that like to listen to music, and if that works for you, then I'm not saying that you need to change that. That's brilliant. It also needs to be comfortable.
Yes.
And I've got strong memories of a friend actually that I was talking to who was detailing to me all the struggles that they've been going through, and then I was asking them about how they're sleeping, and they said terribly, and I asked why. They've been sleeping on the sofa for 6 months. That's not going to help. And sleep is so important to our mental well-being, because if we are not getting enough sleep, the consequences, anxiety, irritability, low mood, fatigue, cognitive difficulty in concentrating, and it can even lead to psychotic episodes. It is just that important.
And there is, that with sleep and comfort in sleep especially, there is that expense that can come with that. And if you're in a situation where you can't afford to get a comfortable mattress or a bed frame, for example, it's about having a look at the other affordable ways that might be out there. One of the things I did when I first moved into my flat is I was sleeping on the sofa, and I felt like I had 13 spines because it was all kind of, I was scrunched up in the night. I just didn't feel like I had one cohesive back. And I looked into getting an airbed, a good quality airbed, and I ended up sleeping on that for about 3 months just because it was fairly inexpensive, but it had the comfort element to it. It meant that I was able to properly stretch out. Investing in things like, somebody in the comments has talked about white noise machines. They're quite useful. Also, phones have white noise apps, and phones can be quite useful if you're used to having the TV on at night. I saw a comment right when we started the live about how somebody got rid of their TV and it was the best thing that they'd done for them. And there's also another comment that says, I have an eye mask, no TV, and I go to bed. I go on my phone. Don't go on my phone half an hour before bed. These are really, really good ways to start practicing good sleep hygiene. What I did is I used to have the TV on at all times during the night. And what I do now is that I put the same thing I would watch on TV on my phone, and then I set my phone to turn off in like an hour when I'm supposed to be asleep. That way I'm still getting that sleepy time, still getting myself to sleep with something that helps me, but then there's no chance of it waking me up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Which is quite common when you're watching TV. If you've ever had that DVD moment.
It
You know, when you finished a film at the end of a movie and then you get the "Don't Steal Movies" advert that comes on really loud and wakes you up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I've had that a couple of times, and I've just had a memory that's come back of the time I fell asleep listening to music and woke up to Ed Sheeran blasting in my ear. It was very specific. I can't remember what song, but there we go. Yeah.
Do you want to skip the ads? It's like, come on. Good morning.
Very true. And what I've also seen from the comments, though, is that there's some really nice kind of ideas coming back. You know, we've talked about background noise. Somebody's mentioning that their bedding affects how they sleep, so some jersey bedding can be a really good thing as well. And also eye masks, no TV, putting your phone away half an hour before bed. All of these can prove to be really good. Another couple of things I would consider. We can look to manage our daytime routines and then our nighttime routines as well. When we're talking about daytime routines, incorporating exercise, not drinking after 3 p.m, making sure that we're doing enough in the day to leave ourselves tuckered out is a good idea. Nighttime routines, alcohol might feel like it helps us to get to sleep, and we saw it mentioned earlier. It doesn't help you get to those deep recesses of sleep that you necessarily need to be able to wake up feeling regenerated, rejuvenated, and ready to go. So we should be avoiding alcohol, ideally, as well. Reading before bed, getting into a set pattern so that when you start it, and it's the same pattern every night, your body already knows and your mind already knows that it is getting towards time to shut down and to go to sleep.
Brilliant, those are really good tips for sleep hygiene. We're going to go on to the final question now, because we are heading on to the last part of our life now, which is why is sleep important? So have we got anything about the sleep cycle?
That'd be good. That would be good. I think I might prepare a graphic for it.
There it is. So the sleep cycle, we want to talk about the 5 stages of our sleep very quickly, because I think that helps to kind of talk about, you know, it helps to identify where our sleep is currently.
It is. So whenever we're going to sleep, ideally, in the perfect world, what we will find ourselves doing is navigating the 5 different areas of sleep. We start off going through stages 1 to 4, and these are called NREM stages of sleep, and what they stand for is non-rapid eye movement. Broadly speaking, those first 4 stages describe as you go from being awake to light sleep all the way through down to that deep sleep where it's really, really hard to wake you up. What comes after that is actually called REM sleep. This is called rapid eye movement sleep, and that is where you start to wake up, funnily enough. You get a little bit more alert, but this is the stage where you're also dreaming. Why is sleep important? Because in stages 4 and the REM stage of sleep, what we are doing is we are giving our brain an opportunity to rejuvenate, to fix the cells from the day before. That's a huge part of it. But the main thing as well is that when we are dreaming, when we are getting to those lower recesses of sleep, what we are actually doing is processing our experiences from the day before. We are saving information from what has happened, but more importantly, we're processing some of those emotions and those subconscious bits perhaps that we hadn't had a chance to process while we were awake. And in that sense, to put it in a simple sentence, sleep is like an emotional reset.
Yeah.
Which is why without sleep,
it can have a massive effect on our mental health and the ability to process that information and process our thoughts.
Exactly.
As well.
Just to highlight how important this is, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they were telling me about an experience of going to 7 Acres, and when they went to 7 Acres, for if you haven't heard of it, is the acute mental health ward on the Isle of Wight. They went there, and the first thing that was treated was their sleep, because it is that important to how we feel in any given moment on any given day. And so much interesting research starts to show that when we might fall into mental health issues, one of the first things to go can be sleep. You might be able to work on the mental health condition, but the issues with sleep can still exist.
Absolutely.
However, more interestingly, if we can start to work on the sleep, the consequences a lot of the time of the mental health issue lifts as well.
Yes.
They are intertwined.
They are definitely intertwined. And it's the end of our life. I don't know how to don't know how I was going to go to the conclusion of this live, but we've run out of time, rapidly ran out of time. But thank you very much everybody for attending our live today. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been really amazing to see the comments and everybody kind of coming up with these amazing suggestions. So if you're watching this on demand, so to speak, please check out the comments because there are some really, really good suggestions in there from the members of our community.
Exactly, and if you're joining us today as well, please do not hesitate to join us in 2 weeks' time, same time, on Friday the 23rd of April, where we're going to be doing a similar live, but we're going to be looking at regulating mood or emotional regulation and really opening up the floor to you guys again to see if there's any kind of information that you'd like, any burning questions, anything that we can help you with. It'd be fantastic. But on the note of today, it's been a pleasure, but do not underestimate the importance that this can prove in managing your mental well-being.
Absolutely. Right. Have a lovely afternoon, everybody, and we shall see you in a fortnight.
Absolutely.
Bye, guys.